Lewis Hamilton sits in a Ferrari cockpit watching the very power unit he helped perfect at Mercedes dominate qualifying from the outside. The FIA has just moved to ban the exact loophole Mercedes used to secure 3 straight Saturday victories. A vote before the Miami Grand Prix could rewrite the 2026 energy rules overnight. This is not a minor adjustment, this is a direct strike at the foundation of Mercedes' current advantage, and it changes everything for the driver chasing his first win in red. The SF26 carries hardware bets no other team matched. Steel alloy cylinder heads, a compact turbo, a battery design born from Ferrari's Le Mans winning hypercar. These choices cannot be altered mid-season, but if the FIA's fix stays in software, limiting energy per lap or capping power deployment, those physical advantages suddenly become unstoppable. Mercedes built their edge on energy management software refined over 11 years. Ferrari bet on metal and heat and pressure. The data from Suzuka shows a qualifying gap of 0.7 of a second. That number is the battlefield, but here is what the paddock is not talking about. The rule change everyone expects might not be the one that matters most. If the FIA targets hardware next, Ferrari's entire philosophy is at risk. If they stop at software, Mercedes' crown slips. Lewis Hamilton knows this better than anyone. He has lived both sides of this war. What comes next will decide whether his redemption arc begins in Miami or waits for another season, and that answer lies in a room where team principals, engineers, and regulators are about to make a choice that will echo through the entire championship. The hardware gamble awaits. Ferrari's engineers made a choice no rival would accept when they signed off on the SF26 power unit. They committed to materials and designs that cannot be altered once the season begins. Steel components that expand under heat to unlock higher compression, a turbocharger built for instant response rather than peak straight-line speed, a battery architecture tested in endurance racing, not just Grand Prix sprints. These decisions locked Ferrari into a path where mid-season fixes are impossible, but that constraint becomes a weapon if the rules change in a very specific way. The compression ratio rule requires engines to meet 16:1 at room temperature. Mercedes found a way to exploit thermal expansion, reaching nearly 18:1 when the engine is hot, gaining an estimated 10 to 15 horsepower. Ferrari's steel alloy heads were designed to handle that higher pressure from the start, not as a loophole but as a core philosophy. The FIA's new check, adding a 130-degree verification from June 1st, closes that gap going forward. It does not erase the advantage Mercedes already used to win 3 races, and that timing matters more than the technical detail itself. What no broadcast covered is this: if the FIA's Miami changes stay focused on software settings, energy limits, and power deployment rates, Ferrari's physical investments remain untouched. Mercedes built their qualifying dominance on code that manages energy with surgical precision. George Russell's Melbourne top speed of 327 kilometers per hour came from algorithms, not metal, but capped the total energy available per lap, and that software edge shrinks. Suddenly, the hardware Ferrari bet on becomes the differentiator, and that is where this story gets complicated, because the next battle is not about what is under the hood, but about what is written in the rules. Mercedes built their 2026 qualifying dominance on something you cannot see. The W16's energy management software, refined over 11 hybrid-era titles, finds advantages in the rules that rivals cannot match. George Russell's Melbourne pole position came with a gap of 0.785 seconds to the nearest non-Mercedes car. That margin was not about raw horsepower or aerodynamic efficiency, and it was about code that deploys power with a precision no other team has replicated. But the system that created that gap relies on a regulatory blind spot few teams dared to exploit. The 2026 rules require the MGUK to reduce output by 50 kilowatts per second when the battery nears empty. Mercedes found a way to trigger an emergency shutdown clause instead, holding full 350 kilowatt power right to the timing line. In a race, that triggers a 60-second lockout penalty. In qualifying, that penalty means nothing because the lap is already complete. The gain is small, maybe 0.05 of a second, but at this level, that is the difference between pole and fifth. The software that manages this trick is the real weapon, and it is about to be targeted. If the FIA caps the total energy available per lap, Does the most sophisticated software in the grid suddenly matter less? The answer could redefine the championship battle. Mercedes spent years perfecting algorithms that squeeze every joule from the system. But if there are fewer joules to manage, that advantage shrinks dramatically. Suzuka's practice data hinted at this possibility before anyone spoke about it publicly. And that is where the story turns, because the test results from that weekend hold a clue the paddock is still debating. The FIA ran a quiet experiment at Suzuka that changed the entire regulatory conversation. They reduced the harvestable energy limit from 9 megajoules to 8 megajoules for that weekend only. The result was immediate and measurable. Super clipping duration dropped from roughly 10 seconds to 6 seconds per lap. The bizarre lift and coast pattern fans complained about became far less visible. Most importantly, the lap time penalty was only around half a second. That small cost for a major improvement in drivability gave regulators the confidence to push further. Pat Fry, Formula One's chief technical officer, referenced the Suzuka data in April briefings as proof of concept for deeper energy caps. What no broadcast covered is this: teams received post-session data packets showing sector-by-sector deployment comparisons. Mercedes' advantage was most pronounced in Sector 3, where energy management is most critical. When total energy is constrained, the gap between brilliant software and adequate software narrows sharply. The marginal gain from superior algorithms diminishes when there is simply less energy to manage. This is the part that changes everything. If reducing energy by 1 megajoule shrinks Mercedes' qualifying gap by half, what happens at 6 or 7 megajoules? The answer points toward a fundamental shift in how the championship could unfold. A tighter qualifying field means Lewis Hamilton starts closer to the front, where his racecraft and tire management can make the difference. But reaching that outcome requires a specific regulatory choice, and two very different proposals are now fighting for approval. The battle over which fix wins is about to move from engineering rooms to the voting table. Two competing proposals now sit on the FIA desk, each promising to fix the same problem from opposite directions. Tony Cucurella, a former race engineer with Ferrari and BMW, published simulations showing that cutting MGUK output to 200 kilowatts and harvestable energy to 6 megajoules would eliminate superclipping entirely. The trade-off is a top speed reduction of about 10 kilometers per hour and a lap time increase of roughly 1.5 seconds. McLaren's approach is simpler. Raise the superclipping cap from 250 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts to soften the harvesting process without altering the total energy budget. One path reshapes the power balance. The other smooths the existing system. Stefano Domenicali has publicly framed the 2026 rules as needing fine-tuning, not surgery. Language that aligns with McLaren's incremental fix. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. The political math behind each proposal favors different teams. Mercedes built their qualifying edge on managing large energy reserves with precision software. A hard cap on total energy directly undermines that advantage. Ferrari, after 3 races of watching Mercedes pull away on Saturdays, has little reason to accept a gentle tweak that leaves the hierarchy intact. The vote before Miami is not just technical, it is a strategic calculation where every team weighs short-term pain against long-term parity, and that is where this story gets complicated. If the Cucurella approach passes, Mercedes' qualifying dominance could shrink from 7/10 to 2/10 overnight. That shift would tighten the entire grid and amplify the value of racecraft over pure software optimization, but reaching that outcome requires agreement from the very team that benefits most from the current rules. The April 20th summit will test whether sporting fairness can overcome competitive self-interest. What happens in that room will decide whether Lewis Hamilton finally gets the Saturday platform he needs to fight for wins. The human stakes of this regulatory battle are about to take center stage. Lewis Hamilton knows exactly what those qualifying modes do because he spent over a decade perfecting them at Mercedes. Now he watches from the Ferrari garage as George Russell and Kimi Antonelli fire up the very same energy deployment strategies against him. The SF26 is fast in race trim but lacks the Saturday power that creates track position. After a 2025 season with 0 podiums and a championship deficit of 86 points, the margin between 6th and 1st has never felt smaller, and that is where this story gets complicated. Of course, the qualifying deficit sits around 25 to 30 horsepower, costing Hamilton roughly 3 to 4 tenths of a second second on Saturdays. At Miami, that gap translates to losing 3 or 4 track positions before the first corner even arrives. But Hamilton's racecraft thrives with track position. Ferrari's compact turbo delivers the best starts on the grid. Tire wear remains controlled. Nico Rosberg has noted that when qualifying gaps shrink, the best racers win more often. The data tells a completely different story about where Hamilton's true advantage lies. If the FIA's energy rule changes past before Miami, that qualifying gap could narrow from 7/10 to 2/10. Suddenly, Hamilton starts P4 instead of P10, preserving tires and strategy options for the fight that matters. But reaching that outcome requires a regulatory choice that Mercedes may not support. The political battle ahead is as critical as the technical one, and that answer lies in a room where team principals and regulators are about to make a decision that will echo through the entire championship. The political clock awaits. The regulatory timeline is moving fast. April 15th brings a sporting rules meeting. April 16th follows with a technical session. April 20th holds the summit where team principals, FIA leaders, and Stefano Domenicali will be in the same room. After that comes an online vote through the F1 Commission and final sign-off by the World Motorsport Council. All of this must happen before the Miami Grand Prix on May 3rd. Changes need majority support from teams and engine manufacturers. But Mercedes can block, but cannot unilaterally stop FIA-led technical directives. The clock is ticking. The audio clause adds another layer to this battle. If Ferrari power unit falls more than 2% behind the top mark after 6 races, they unlock a mid-season hardware upgrade. That upgrade could arrive around the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Enrico Cardile has emphasized designing for the rules as written, not as anticipated. Private team communications suggest Ferrari is prepared to accept short-term pain for long-term parity if the FIA commits to stable rules after Miami. What no broadcast covered is this: the auto path and the software fix are not alternatives. They are 2 prongs of the same recovery strategy. If rule changes pass before Miami, was their Mercedes early season points advantage could be offset by a Ferrari and Hamilton surge in the second half of the year. The title fight stays alive, not through one dramatic move, but through a series of calculated regulatory choices. The political price of pushing changes through over-engine maker pushback is real, and Ferrari, after 3 races of watching Mercedes pull away on Saturdays, is not in the mood for a gentle deal. What happens in those rooms over the next 6 days will decide whether the championship becomes a Mercedes cruise or a genuine battle. The consequence close awaits. The rules will change before Miami. That much is certain. What remains uncertain is whether those changes will be bold enough to reshape the championship or gentle enough to preserve the status quo. If energy caps drop to 6 megajoules and MGUK output is limited, Mercedes' qualifying advantage shrinks dramatically. Ferrari's hardware bets, locked in since the season began, suddenly become the differentiator. Lewis Hamilton finally gets the Saturday platform his racecraft requires. But if the fix stays soft, the hierarchy holds, and the battle for parity waits for another season. James Allison has publicly questioned how Formula One can restore one fast, all-out qualifying lap under the current rules. That admission from Mercedes' own technical leadership signals even the dominant team recognizes the system's flaws. The championship trajectory now hinges on a single regulatory choice. A tighter qualifying field amplifies strategy, tire management, and driver skill, areas where Hamilton and Ferrari have historically excelled. As the data from Suzuka proved the concept, the political will to implement it remains the final variable. In Formula One, the fastest car does not always win. Sometimes it is the team that built for the rules that actually get enforced. As the clock ticks toward Miami, one question defines the rest of the season. Did Ferrari bet on the right future?